When I first heard about these 3 programs, I thought the title was very odd. Unknown. Why unknown? My father was the most famous man in films, and everything that he'd made had been seen time and time again. And yet when I saw the programs, they came as an incredible surprise. I was surprised by seeing films that I didn't even know existed. I was surprised at the sheer photographic quality of those early pictures. It's unbelievable. And I was surprised at how young he looked. There was this charming, beautiful, boyish young man who was not only the highest paid star in Hollywood, but who was also his own writer, his own director, his own producer, his own editor, actor, and then when sound came in, he even wrote his own music. You'd think that he would have been very proud of all that hard work. Well, he was incredibly secretive. As children, we all recognized his genius. We all realized that he was a genius. But frankly, we weren't very curious. And sometimes if we did ask him something, he'd say, "Get on with your homework." I understand why now. Someone defined art as concealment of effort. And clearly the effort involved in making a Chaplin film was superhuman, partly because of the way he worked. Apparently, sometimes he would begin with only one single idea and then he'd just make up the rest as he went along. And often he'd get stuck and repeat the same scene again and again and again in hope of sparking off some idea. And I realize now that he probably would like most of this to be forgotten. And yet, far from diminishing his status as a filmmaker, it made me admire him all the more. Now, how did all this material come to light? Much of it was preserved in my father's vault. He had ordered it to be junked, but the orders hadn't been carried out, thank goodness. And my mother made the material available to the producers, to David and to Kevin. And as soon as this happened, rare Chaplin footage started appearing as if by magic. There's an American collector called Raymond Rohauer, who years before had acquired the outtakes of the comedies my father had made for Mutual in 1916. These too had been ordered to be burned in the 50s, but this man had saved them, thank goodness. And there's some incredible footage that was photographed on the set of City Lights by a good friend of my father who was called Ralph Barton, and this was preserved by his nephew in Kansas City. All these priceless discoveries have been combined with the more well-known sequences to reveal in the most incredible, moving way something that's never been seen before, which is Charlie Chaplin at work.
This program consists almost entirely of film never before seen in public. In the silent days, Hollywood incinerators worked round the clock. And this is one reason why Chaplin's working methods are so little known. Like all filmmakers, he destroyed the film he didn't need, his outtakes, his rushes. And film that escaped the flames often destroyed itself. It could rot through chemical decomposition. Film which might be as revealing as the sketchbooks of a great artist. For Chaplin was a great artist. As far as the art of film is concerned, many consider him the greatest. Another clown, Grock, said of him, Chaplin gave our generation true insight into the heart of a clown. More than that, into the heart of all browbeaten humanity. But Chaplin was very secretive about the way he worked. Only once did he allow himself to be filmed in action, for a feature of 1923. And then only in brief shots like these, which gave nothing away. He was the silent filmmaker supreme. But he shrouded these early days in mystery to the end. Those films made under his control he carefully preserved, his classics, which have given us all some of our most precious memories. For this film, Chaplin did not own the copyright. Easy Street, made for Mutual in 1916. These early comedies Chaplin ignored. Many passed into other hands, copied and recopied until they were a strain to watch. This is how the original prints once looked. The photographic quality is sharp and clear, emphasizing the tragedy that so much has been lost. But by a miracle, some Chaplin outtakes have survived. Can after can of them from the period of the Mutual two-reelers. No one survives from the Mutual period, so the film in these cans must tell its own remarkable story, a kind of archaeology of the cinema. New York, 1916. Chaplin receives a bonus check from the president of the Mutual Film Corporation. His first year's salary? $670,000 plus the bonus. In return for becoming the highest paid entertainer in history, Chaplin has to produce 12 smash hit comedies. The first is The Floor Walker. Its subject, with typical Chaplin irony, is embezzlement on a grand scale. He gathers his stock company of cast and technicians. They will work on all the Mutuals. The heavy, Eric Campbell, on the left. The heroine, Edna Purviance. Character man, Albert Austin. And Henry Bergman, who supported Chaplin in so many ways. Behind the camera, Rolly Totherow, who's been with Chaplin a year. Chaplin has come to depend on Tothero's camera eye as a kind of second director. Mutual builds Chaplin a studio in Los Angeles. They call it the Lone Star Studio. Like other studios of the time, it's open to the elements. Muslin cloth diffuses the sunlight, but fails to keep out the wind. This first comedy was inspired by the big department stores that Chaplin had seen in New York. He reproduced one in his studio, but he still needed something to set his film apart. In New York, he had seen a man tumble from an escalator. Without knowing precisely how he would use it, he ordered his construction crew to install an escalator in his set. "I would build these sets without an idea in my head," Chaplin said. But once they were there, comic situations would develop. And one can watch them develop in his rushes. Rushes which have not been seen for nearly 70 years. The slate board provides a new number for every shot. Here at last is a key to unlock the secret of Chaplin's working methods. His rushes show brief but precious glimpses of Chaplin directing, of Chaplin improvising on the escalator, of the camera crew at work, of Chaplin relaxing between takes. The first revelation the rushes provide is that Chaplin rehearsed on film. Here he shoots a scene on his new prop, which has only been roughly worked out. Having screened it, he reshoots it to quicken the action. In the film, the goods are going fast. The manager's going too. He's been embezzling along with the floor walker. In the ensuing mayhem, the escalator becomes the star of the film. As the great Max Sennett said, why the hell didn't we ever think of a running staircase? Props and sets were the springboard for all the Chaplin mutual comedies. Chaplin was living at the Los Angeles Athletic Club when the idea of a comedy set in a health spa occurred to him. The film would become one of his most successful, The Cure. Yet it proved an enormous struggle. He followed his usual method, working entirely without a script. He decided his health spa should be a prosperous place. Its focal point should be a drinking fountain with pure spa water. The man who found the well, played by Loyal Underwood, should be a physical wreck. So should his employees. Amidst all this tranquil suffering, what could Charlie do? His first appearance with Eric Campbell gives him plenty of scope for slapstick. But almost at once, he finds himself slowing up. He next aims directly for the first joke. And the action quickens. Chaplin is signaling 2 reels of unmotivated anarchy in his very first scene. And that is more Max Sennett style than his. When he views this scene, he quickly spots its defects and knows at once he can do better. By setting it in the lobby, he can provide some reason for the gag. He can also change his costume so it shows up better. And with Eric Campbell as the victim, there's more reason for Charlie's callous behavior and its results. Now Chaplin changes the man in the wheelchair to Albert Austin. The raised skirt is more diverting on the stairs. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. Chaplin is suffering from a creative block. He repeats the scene a dozen times without being able to improve it. But all the work with the wheelchair gives him a brainwave. Charlie on the side of authority, bringing order out of chaos, is inconsistent with his character. Chaplin brings on the manager to end the joke. He senses there's little future in the bellhop character. 77 slates in. The health spa is rebuilt. The drinking fountain becomes a medicinal well. And now there's a resident drunk. When Chaplin showed John Rand how to play the part, he must have recalled his own music hall career when he specialized in drunks. And he makes a dramatic decision to scrap everything and start again by simply reversing the roles. He has found the character and the costume. The only reminder of all he has discarded is the wheelchair. It is replaced by another mobile prop, the revolving door. Chaplin had a lot of trouble with inanimate objects. After a dozen takes, his cane accidentally jams in the door. But in the film, he uses the mishap. And the revolving door sparks off one of the most hilarious moments in the picture. This is not Eric Campbell, but a stuntman. Chaplin has told him to stay underwater for as long as he can, waving his legs. The signal for his rescue, his legs together. Among those who rush to pull him out is Eric Campbell. The gymnasium is the heart of a health spa and the heart of this film. Chaplin had many attempts to find the right gags. This sequence was cut from the final film, perhaps because it lacked the logic Chaplin was always searching for. He uses the contortionist to more memorable effect in the massage scene. 622 slates in. Chaplin is reluctant to throw away the traffic cop gag, and he tries to fit it into the new shape. But without a uniform, there's no reason for the gag, no logic, and Chaplin discards it. This romantic interlude, with Charlie promising to take the pledge, demonstrates the perils of directing and acting in the same film. Had Chaplin been watching from the camera, he would have noticed the overhead diffusers waving in the wind and letting sunlight through to the steps behind. Surviving prints of the cure always fade out at this point. Could this have been how the film once ended? Or is Chaplin just fooling for the benefit of Edna Purviance? Edna Purviance was Chaplin's leading lady for 8 years. She'd had no acting experience, which Chaplin preferred. This camera test shows the features which first attracted him. She had a sensitive mouth, he wrote, and beautiful, large eyes. She was more than pretty. Here, Chaplin directs her in a scene from The Adventurer. He wants her to resist Eric Campbell's advances with cool distaste. Edna was not a born actress, as these outtakes show, and Chaplin invested enormous effort in wresting a performance from her. She seems fed up shooting take after take, but her fatigue is part of the performance Chaplin is squeezing out of her. And gradually, she gives him the quality he wants. But he adjusts her position and tries again. Edna was required to be cool and distant so often that one critic wrote, "Edna Purviance may always have been sad." These rushes would have surprised that critic. Edna's sense of humor delighted Chaplin, but cost him a great deal of film. For not only did she break up on her own performance, in this scene from The Vagabond, she bursts in on an actress playing her mother. In an outtake from behind the screen, Charlie coaches her as though he were a director and not just an assistant prop man. But much of their work together must have looked like this. Chaplin tries another version for his encounter with Edna. Desperate for work, she has disguised herself as a prop boy. She plays a harp, which Chaplin realizes is a trifle unlikely. A guitar is more masculine. But the boy's clothes merely heighten Edna's femininity. It's hardly surprising that for a while she and Chaplin had as close a relationship off-screen as on. Behind the screen was a parody of Life at the Maxenid studio, where Chaplin began his film career. In the film, Charlie skillfully avoids all the pies, but not in the outtakes. Senate comedies were also famous for glamorous girls. Dancing girls, bathing beauties. Chaplin parodies them all with his Dance of the Cleaning Ladies. On the next door set, the drama director is behind schedule on his historical epic. The executioner has no idea how to handle his axe. The director gives him a lesson. The blade falls within an inch of his heel, and there's no doubt the axe is sharp, for the blade is buried in the floor. Risky to do once, Chaplin does it again and again. Watching it slowly shows how close the axe comes to his foot. How it was done was never revealed, for Chaplin favored mystery. The solution can only be found from the film itself. If we slow this down, it's even more baffling. He seems to kick an object on the floor, and his hat wobbles before he conjures it on his head. Chaplin wanted the axe to fall dangerously close, without danger. This slate board provides a clue as to how he did it. And the answer shows how skillfully Chaplin and his technicians could use camera tricks when they needed to. It was done by cranking the camera in reverse and staging the action backwards. The hat falls from his head, which is the reason for the wobble, and the object on the floor is a mistake, his pipe knocked from his mouth. And after all this effort, the scene was cut and never shown. A Chaplin mystery, a film that was never made. The setting, an artist's cafe. Edna Purviance is the girl, as usual. She could be playing a kind of trilby to Eric Campbell's Svengali. Albert Austin delivers a challenge to a duel. Whatever the idea, Chaplin rejects it. For now, he starts in earnest, on slate 1. Albert Austin wears the same costume. Charlie is better dressed than usual. Chaplin puts Austin off his concentration. After all, it's only slate 1. 46 slates later, and Chaplin uses a tracking shot to introduce Edna in the background on the left. Now Edna wears a different costume and plays a different character. A lonely girl who can't afford a meal. When Charlie enters, the artist's cafe is still in evidence. But now his intentions become clearer. Here is how he planned slate 1 to fit in. He cast Henry Bergman as a bullying waiter. The film is a simple cafe comedy about a man who's never been in a cafe. That's all it is, so far. Now he's got rid of his companion, Charlie discovers a new interest. Charlie now sees the importance of table manners. A customer in trouble for not paying the bill. In his early years, Chaplin was intimidated by waiters, and he knew just how many people shared his response. Charlie checks his own money supply. Chaplin usually plays such scenes with delicate restraint, but in this outtake, his improvisation gets the better of him. Finding a coin on the floor gives Charlie the confidence to recall the waiter. Henry Bergman was a staunch member of Chaplin's stock company. proud of his ability to play any part. But Chaplin was now wondering about his ability to play this one. Bergman plays the scene without that extra sense of menace so vital to the role. Chaplin is halfway through the film. He has discovered, at last, that he has the right approach but the wrong actor. He has to make a drastic decision. The kind of decision that drives directors mad. The next day, he starts all over again. He has to reshoot all the waiter scenes with Eric Campbell, this time to much greater effect. The scene is so much stronger that Chaplin's reactions are stronger, too. By the change of actor, Chaplin converts a mildly amusing scene into what, in its full version, is a classic sequence of film comedy. Later, Henry Bergman is brought back to play a rich artist, anxious to paint Edna's portrait. Chaplin's original idea of an artist cafe pays off. The cafe scene cannot be sustained for a full 2 reels, even with retakes of Campbell. Chaplin needs another outstanding idea. He gets it by asking a simple question: where has Edna come from? Edna and her mother are immigrants. Chaplin now has the theme and the title for his comedy. He retains the emphasis on food. He does not, however, retain this scene. Chaplin plans to open the film with the boat scene, giving to all the scenes in the cafe an extra dimension. How the rocking effect was done is revealed in this photograph. A pendulum fitted to the camera enables it to swing as soon as the boat itself begins to rock. Chaplin makes even the misery of the immigrants seem comic. And he can use his stock company in new parts: Henry Bergman and Loyal Underwood. The set of the dining room is not on the boat, but in the studio. The cameraman accidentally reveals that the set is on rockers. It is here in the film that Charlie finally meets Edna. During the card game, Chaplin produces a prop he had never used before and would never use again. Other outtakes include flashes of Chaplin as director, telling tiny Sanford how to move his arm. Watching an uninspired actor in growing dismay. Becoming affected by Sanford's overacting. By Sanford's whistling. Or by his own method of shuffling in which he doesn't move a single card. In contrast to all this hilarity, a flash of anger at unruly extras in the farewell scene. Near the end of the filming, Chaplin ties up the loose ends. A coin now becomes the link between the boat and the cafe. After 745 slates, he has to reshoot his meeting with Edna, for now they know each other. The film now falls into place as Charlie realizes that Edna is alone in the world. What started out as a simple cafe comedy now becomes a well-thought-out story of two immigrants who meet on a boat, part, and are brought together by fate, a coin, and a bullying waiter. The rich artist now propels them towards a happy ending. He will pay for the privilege of painting Edna's portrait. And Chaplin wraps up the story with this charming scene. On its release, Photoplay magazine said, "In its roughness and apparent simplicity, The Immigrant is a jewel. No farce seen in years has been more adroitly, more perfectly worked out." To make sure that everything was perfectly worked out, Chaplin surrounded himself with vaudevillians like John Rand, who knew comedy inside out. And he had the help of one of the top English music hall comedians, who can be glimpsed at the end of this take demonstrating the gag to Rand. Charlie's older brother, Sydney Chaplin. Sydney, on the right, had been the more famous comic in England, but he took his work less seriously than his brother, which perhaps accounts for this piece of film, the kind of fun in front of the camera Charlie seldom indulged in. Sydney had just joined his brother as business manager, and he helped out on the films, for he was adept at every kind of stage work. But even as skilled a performer as Sid Chaplin could make mistakes. So it was with his brother. Buried among his rushes are his mishaps and accidents. The sheer physical strain of turning out a film a month was enormous, even though Chaplin was so young. Was it coincidence that in Chaplin's last film, under the demanding mutual contract, he plays a man who escapes from prison? The Adventurer was a film of speed and vitality, which began and ended with a chase. Later in the film, Charlie finds himself a guest at a house party, but he's never been a guest of anyone, except the federal authorities. Chaplin often started a scene with only the beginning worked out, hoping to be inspired en route. He usually was. Here he has the routine rehearsed as far as the drinks are concerned. Now he begins to improvise. He doesn't get very far, but he's obviously pleased with the gag. This take is awkwardly staged. However, it gives him a bright idea. He should now meet someone. Who? He improvises a joke which convulses them both. Now everything falls into place. Charlie becomes better acquainted with Edna. This charming scene does not appear in the film. Chaplin has worked his way into a major difficulty. He had started a sequence with a Spanish dancer. We've assembled the scene as we think Chaplin planned it. Having set up the Spanish dancer, Chaplin has to make something out of it. In this close-up, he conveys the effect on his pulse rate much more strongly. But he has given himself a problem by flirting with two women in one scene. 30 slates later, he is still stubbornly trying to conjure comedy from an unpromising situation. Charlie thinks the dancer is causing him to overheat. Actually, he's sitting on a radiator leaking steam. That much Chaplin has worked out. What he hasn't worked out is what to do when he discovers the radiator. the scene ends with a spontaneous but unrehearsed move, untypically clumsy, and much of it missed by the cameraman. Another 30 slates, and Chaplin is still in a corner of his own devising. But he has condensed the scene and made the discovery more convincing. The steam is now painfully realistic. And the scene leads neatly into the next. But each solution leads to another problem. Now he has to find a logical start to the radiator scene, which he shoots at the end. Now that he has worked out all the permutations after 100 laborious slates, what does he do with the sequence? That's all there is to it. No Spanish dancer, no radiator, just a hint of the dance. When I had difficulty solving a problem, wrote Chaplin, I would lay off work and try to think, striding up and down in torment. This unique fragment shows him in discussion with Albert Austin and Henry Bergman, his two closest advisors. It was the hours spent like this that produced moments like this. Chaplin made 12 outstanding comedies for Mutual in a mere 16 months. It was, he said later, the happiest period of his entire career. But he was not entirely happy with the films. Must every comedy end with a chase, he asked? In 1917, he left. He joined First National, built his own studio, and at last achieved the independence he had aimed for. Now he planned to concentrate on quality rather than quantity. He would be the boss. He would produce great films. And those who worked with him describe how in the next episode.
Making pictures those days was pretty much a home cooking proposition. In other words, if you needed a kid to play in the thing, you'd say, well, who's got a kid? And they'd bring one down, you know. And I lived up on Franklin Circle with my family, and they needed a kid to play a brat in this picture, doing a lot of slapping and a lot of kicking and a lot of torturing of poor Charlie. And my old man brings me down, and I was a well-brought-up kid and a gentle child, and I was not a great slapper of people. And so when it came time to start slapping people, I didn't want to do it. I said, I don't want to slap, I don't want to hit Uncle Charlie. You know, I was a gentle kid. And poor Charlie couldn't get me to slap him until finally he and Sydney were playing slapping games. They saying, Sydney, hit me again. And Sydney would give him a shot. And Charlie said, oh, it's so much fun. And oh, I just love it. And when he's hitting himself. And they finally convinced me that slapping was a great charge to him, you know. So I think I might have gotten into the swing of it later on.
Hollywood, 1918. Arriving at his own studio as the most successful film director in the business.
And times when I was at the studio and he would arrive, Alf Reeves would shout, "He's here!" And I think that's the only time I ever heard that, in the theater, amongst show people, or on sets, film sets, or anything. He's here. Like the prince has arrived.
On this backlot, and on his 2 stages, Chaplin would produce his greatest work. He now had complete control over the making of his films. He even had his own laboratory. But he was still answerable to his distributors. First National had paid him $1 million for 8 pictures, with no time limit. He'd taken 2 years to make 4. With independence, he had slowed down. The hectic pace of the mutuals, 12 films in 16 months, had given way to an atmosphere of relaxation. Rehearsing with the company, who would stay with Chaplin for years. These shots appear to be genuine glimpses of Chaplin at work. But no, they were staged for a film Chaplin tried to slip into his First National contract. First National rejected it. They were worried, for he was spending month after month on a mysterious film with a child actor named Jackie Coogan, the Kid. Slate 1775, the only fragment of the rushes to survive. Chaplin was using more and more of First National's money, and the film was growing longer and longer.
He had an idea, and he just developed an idea from an idea from an idea. It was strictly a cuff-a-tone, off the cuff. And they're little vignettes. They're all hung together by a small gossamer web. And he was successful in weaving that.
He was weaving gags together with dramatic scenes, pioneering a new type of comedy of feature length. But to First National, he was behaving like the character in his own film.
production. It's going to be 6 reels. It's already taken 5-6 months. And no story. Just little bits of a story. And with only Chaplin there to solve what the key to the story is.
Chaplin was given advice. Invite the first national exhibitors to the studio.
They came in a body. I think they were going to lynch him. And he knew what was going on. I mean, you know, Chaplin was no dummy. He knew that the pressure was on. And he put me on to divert their wrath. And we got him wound up with a whole bunch of stuff that I did with Chaplin. We had little bits that he had taught me, and I did a dance, I did the shimmy, stuff from the old act that these fellas had never seen before. Take as much time as you want, Charlie, and he was going to anyway, because nobody could say hurry up to him.
Chaplin's independence was safe. Chaplin introduces another child to the cast, Lita Grey.
I became his flirting sweetheart in the heavens sequence of the picture. Because Charlie had been experimenting with me, putting my hair up on the top of my head. My hair was long then. And he had the wardrobe lady dress me in my mother's clothes, and I photographed quite a bit older. So he said, I think we can use her as the angel. That was in the second half of the picture. The tramp falls asleep on the doorstep after he's looked for the boy. The child is taken away from him, and he wakes up and thinks that the street is heaven, and everybody has wings, and it was very pretty. And I come around the corner, sticking a very skinny leg out, I remember, in a flirtatious kind of way. Went back to school after I finished the Kid contract. And I was bragging to Myrna about having worked for Charlie, what a marvelous man he was, and so forth and so on. And she was intrigued. She wanted to meet him. So I said, well, we'd go to the studio and watch him work one day, which we did. And as soon as Charlie came out to greet us, he said, you're just in time, because I've been testing brunettes for a part in the Gold Rush, this film that I'm going to make. So he did another film test on me and decided that I would be right for the part.
It was 1924. Lita was 15. Now Chaplin led his company on an expedition to Truckee in Northern California. It would be an epic, a story of the Klondike. Chaplin had never done anything like this before. He shipped up everything to make a huge production. For now he was free of First National's petty restraints. He was one of the united artists. He told Lita he wanted this to be his greatest film. Besides the animals, Chaplin brought virtually his entire crew, together with an Alaskan veteran.
Sid Grauman, who owned the famous Grauman's Chinese theater here at that time, came down to the train to say goodbye to us, and Charlie held him on the train. He didn't have a toothbrush or a change of clothes or anything, and he went all the way to Truckee with us and stayed the whole trip.
Outside Truckee, there was nothing. The first task was to build the Gold Rush Village at the foot of Summit Mountain. Chaplin surrounds himself with associates, old and new. As an assistant, Eddie Sutherland, who recalls the trip in a 1959 recording.
I was Chaplin's assistant, so I said camera and cut. And I made suggestions like everybody else, but don't let anybody tell you they ever directed Chaplin. Chaplin directed himself.
Sutherland's first job was to organize the Chilkoot Pass.
I had got the ski club from Truckee. We went up and built the exact replica of Chilkoot Pass. We sent down to Sacramento. We brought these 1,100 men from Sacramento, all tramps from the Yolo jungle. They arrived, and we had them on the road at 6 o'clock, and we shot Chilkoot Pass all in one day, the entire thing, the guys going over the hill. And Charlie turned to me and said, "Eddie, that's the greatest executive feat I've ever seen in my life."
It is always thought that Chaplin returned from Truckee after shooting that one big scene. But a remarkable series of photographs from Chaplin's own archive tell a different story. They reveal that Chaplin shot all the exteriors on location, much to the regret of Lita Grey, who longed to get away from the wretched conditions.
A lot of snow, very deep snow, and we all had very heavy fur coats and 2 or 3 thicknesses of clothing, and it was cold. And there again, many retakes. We thought we'd never get off that location.
The crew carried cameras and reflectors high into the mountains to shoot scenes like this one. Charlie, lost, starving, finding a miner's grave. At this very spot occurred the tragedy of the Donner Party, pioneers driven to cannibalism. From this tragedy, Chaplin fashioned high comedy.
We had built a chicken skin for a human being to get into, but we'd built it the size of Pete's Stitch, who was the painter at the studio. And Pete got in it and just walked on, looked like a painter in a chicken skin, you see. So he said, "What do we do?" I said, "It's a very simple matter. You get in it, Charlie." He says, "Oh, I don't want to do that." I said, "Well, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to do it." He says, "All right." So he reluctantly got into the chicken. And when he got into the chicken, he was a chicken.
In the film, the starving Max Wayne only chases Charlie around the hut. The stills show it might have been a very different sequence. But Chaplin discarded it all. This scene and the Chilkoot Pass were all he kept from the entire expedition. The location was the last place for a man like Chaplin to shoot, for he took too long. One moment there was snow, the next it was melting. There was only one thing to do, shoot it all in the studio. Chaplin had to retrace his steps. Under controlled conditions, he reshoots the miner's grave. On the back lot of his studio, he rebuilt the Gold Rush village with artificial snow made from rock salt. Chuck Riesner took over as Chaplin's assistant, and there was a new leading lady, Georgia Hale. Lita Grey, now Chaplin's wife, was pregnant. There was no hope of her playing the part. Once again, Chaplin had to start from scratch. It was something he'd often done before, but never at so enormous a cost.
He didn't care how much money he spent. When it come to making a picture, if it took 5 years, he wanted it as perfect as he could get it.
Chaplin had been Georgia's hero since her childhood. Playing the lead in his biggest picture was her dream come true.
He could make anyone do a scene. He did it, he felt it. He really did it himself. He acted himself. He acted the scene out for you, including every flicker of the eye. He just felt it, gave it to you, and instilled it into you so that you just had to give a terrific performance. He knew the one big fault of actors was overacting. And he knew that hamming a thing didn't have the proper action behind it, that they had lost the action for the motions. So he'd always say, after he gave you the scene, and even though it was a deep emotional scene, he'd always say, just before the camera would go, he said, now do this scene poorly. Walk through it. And then he would get it. I didn't want him to kiss me. The scene called for him to take me in his arms and give me a good big kiss. Charlie kept retaking it because he always retook everything to get the right reaction from me. And finally, I was in a rage, and I really slapped that fellow awfully hard across the face. And that was the take that Charlie took and really wanted, was that violent temper that came out when he kissed me once too often.
Chaplin's intensity when things were going well made him all the angrier when he ran out of ideas.
If he came on the set, he'd have his two hands stuffed into his pants pockets with his shoulders folded together and with a scowl on his face, and he wouldn't do a thing. And he would sit there, and he would let all the people wait. Wouldn't matter how many were being paid or how much it cost. And after he'd sit there in a daze, like to himself, for hours, he would leave and call it all off for the day. And then he wouldn't even call us back for a week. until he was inspired again.
Perhaps the most inspired scene was this one.
The shoelaces were made of licorice. The shoes were made of licorice. The nails were made of some kind of candy. We shot and shot and shot that, too.
And he and Max Wayne got violently ill from eating so many of those shoes. I remember him coming home and how sick he was, and called off production for several days. And of course, we heard that Max Wayne was sick too.
Chaplin shot the final scenes aboard ship. Charlie has struck it rich in the Klondike. Now he meets Georgia again. Georgia Hale had fallen in love with Chaplin long before she met him, with his image on the screen. But he was married to Lita Grey. The marriage foundered right at the end of the picture.
The last scene was really the first time that Charlie could ever express anything toward me that was really legitimate, because he was, for me, he was really belonged to Lita Grey. And so there was absolutely a wall between us. We were very impersonal, but during the scene, he had a legitimate chance to express what he evidently had been feeling, and that was an affection for me. So when he had a chance to kiss me, then the kiss lasted way longer than it should have lasted. It went on, and then finally, and then he kept retaking it and retaking it. Then I was quite sure that his feeling for me was more than just a director for a leading lady. And of course, I knew what my feeling was all my life.
When Chaplin reissued the film in 1942, he spoke the narration himself, and he made a significant alteration to that final scene.
And the little fella gathered himself together, and James, the valet, was told to prepare for an extra guest. Pardon me, said the reporter, but who's the lady? Buzz, buzz, buzz. Oh, you don't say. Well, congratulations. Say, this will make a great story, and with a happy ending. And so it was, a happy ending.
"1931, the talkies have taken over. Chaplin ridicules the early talkies, for he intends to continue making silent pictures, pictures like City Lights. City Lights was the biggest gamble of his career. From the moment he announced his plans, he was criticized. People said he was going out of style. He was crazy to ignore the talkies. Above all, they said his direction was too old-fashioned. Among the actors on the set was a future director.
Every director has his own way of working. He was unique. The films that he made were quite successful, the most successful ever anybody made, so you have to say he's a great picture maker, and directing was part of it. He showed us what to do. He directed us by being us. And he acted every little bit. And you always felt that there was a reluctance, that he couldn't be behind the camera and in front of it at the same time.
One way to overcome that problem was by his old method, rehearsing on film. Chaplin's rejection of sound seemed arrogant, but he knew the tramp could never speak. The story of City Lights was simple. The tramp mistaken for a millionaire by a blind flower girl who falls in love with him. First, he had to find the right girl. He chooses a Chicago society girl, 20-year-old Virginia Cherrill.
Before I signed my contract with Charlie, I made very clear that I wasn't an actress, that I'd had no training of any kind. And he said, that's exactly what I want. If you had had any training, you would have to unlearn it. Because I like to work my own way, and it's not the way anyone else works.
To see him at work has never been possible, for no film existed, until a remarkable home movie came to light, taken by a close friend. It's the only film in existence of Chaplin directing in his tramp costume. He shows her how to hand a flower. As he stands, he is trying to perfect that simple action. The whole story seems so simple, yet it had to be set up in this one scene. If it failed, so would the film. So Chaplin lavished time on Virginia Cherrill.
He was a great inspiration. He gave you so much of the spirit of what he was trying to get out of you. He acted out every part. This was his way of direction. We had no script. And Charlie would simply say, in this scene, I want you to do so and so and so. And then he would show you exactly how he wanted it done. And it sounds ridiculous, but you found yourself feeling that he was you. How could he be a blind girl? But he was. If he was handing you a flower, you had this feeling that he was that person.
The flower stand scene is the first time the flower girl meets the tramp. Chaplin has placed Virginia close to a drinking fountain, but it's the chain that has caught his attention. A watch chain, perhaps? Then he selects a flower. She offers the wrong one. Conveying the blindness was hard enough. Much more difficult was the girl mistaking him for a rich man. What if a rich man buys a flower first? It doesn't help.
He didn't care how many takes he took. In fact, I often thought that if he couldn't think what he was going to do next, he simply went on doing the same shot over again until he thought of it. But he was a perfectionist, and to us it often seemed to be exactly the same, but to him it was not.
Chaplin's frustration mounts as the film seems to crumble before him. He loses patience with the way his assistant, Harry Crocker, handles the extras. He tries another approach. Charlie rushes back and spends his last nickel on the other flower. He already has the first one in his lapel. The girl is supposed to think the rich man has come back for her. The cameras turn on this scene day after day.
It was boring in that there was so much waiting. One waited, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, sometimes for months, literally 3 or 4 months. And Charlie wouldn't come to the studio.
The report sheets show that after 3 weeks shooting, Chaplin was taken ill. He had not solved the sequence. No shooting for over a month. But the cast is kept at the studio just in case.
Nothing to do. I simply sat in my dressing room and read books, knitted, did needlepoint, and was generally bored.
83 days into the picture. No shooting on 62. April the 1st. Chaplin returns and starts again on the flower stand sequence. Now he makes the tramp more soulful, more romantic. But he still can't crack the problem.
He'd take it over and over and over again. And when he'd finally say, it's a take, we'd breathe a sigh of relief, and then he'd say, well, perhaps just one more time.
He tries changing the meeting. He's moved the girl further from the fountain. But why does she stop him? It's becoming a nightmare, one that was still vivid 3 years later when he worked with Alistair Cooke.
He once told me that Virginia Cherrill couldn't lift a flower up properly. And he said it took hours to say, look, all you do is take and you hold it up like this. That's all. But he said somehow she did this or that, you see.
He managed to complete the scene, but he knew something was still missing. He still hadn't solved the problem of the girl mistaking him for a rich man. It would bother him to the very end of production. After 534 days, with no shooting for most of them, he returned to the flower stand sequence.
He woke up one morning, he said, and it suddenly occurred to him, a slamming door of the automobile. So, of course, what happens is that he goes to the girl, says he'd like a flower or bunch, gives her everything he has in the world, which could well be $1 or a dime. And as she's reaching for her change, the rich man walks, she hears the rich man walk back across the sidewalk, get in the car, slam the door, and the car takes off. And she's about to give the change, and she says, "Oh, thank you, sir." And then Chaplin looks at her and realizes he's not going to get anything back, and turns round and tiptoes away without his change. Well, it's just like, you know, water running over a pebble in the film.
Charlie was a god. You forget. Everyone forgets that in this studio he was the only person whose opinion mattered in any way.
All the pressures were on him. Talkies had taken over completely. He had to fire a leading actor and reshoot all his scenes. And always he had to cope with Virginia's inexperience.
He would walk out and he'd put his hands out as though he couldn't see, and then he would run back and be himself. Then he would be the background action. He would say, these people are crossing like this and you must, and he did everything. And he was a dervish.
City Lights moves into its second year. No end in sight. Visitors to the studio could be a welcome diversion.
If there were stars present, he had to be the most important star. But Charlie was always acting. He was always on.
Winston Churchill poses self-consciously on the City Lights set. And Chaplin seems stuck for an idea to bring the visit to life. Back to work, and Chaplin shoots a test for a new idea. The blind girl's vision of her mysterious admirer. "4,337 slates in, he abandons the prince and returns to the simplicity of his story. This scene shows Charlie's farewell. He has given her the money to have her sight restored. He knows he will go to prison and never see her again. The touching relationship of the screen did not exist in real life.
I don't think Charlie really liked me very much. I don't know why. I liked him. I was very impressed with him. But we had almost no social contact of any kind. I was never invited to his house because he didn't entertain very much. But when he did entertain, I was never invited. I had my own life. I think perhaps I had been married and divorced, and perhaps I was more sophisticated than he saw me. Perhaps he saw me as the blind girl and not as me. And for this reason, didn't like me.
She had the scene, the last part of the picture, where she realizes it's him, and she feels and gives him the flower, and well, it's a heartbreaking moment. It's a magnificent moment in the picture. And she said to him just before they did the take, do you think I might get off a little early today because I have to go to the hairdresser's. I'm going to a party tonight. And he went crazy.
Charlie fired me in the middle of the film. I was late coming back, probably from lunch, and he was kept waiting, which was not allowed. So he said I was spoiled and I obviously shouldn't be in films, and I was fired.
The star of the gold rush was brought in.
She was not really an actress. And he simply fought all the way to get her to do the scenes and never felt that he was getting them. But when it came to the final scene, the dramatic scene, where she realizes that after she has her sight, that he was the one who was her benefactor, and she feels his hand and realizes this is the chap that did all these things for her. He did reshoot that scene with me. He played the part right with me, off camera. But he was the little tramp, and he was the one that I played right with. So the feeling was right there between us, because he didn't just direct it, he played it with me. So I saw him and he was with me. And there was a complete rapport between us. And he loved it. And he said, I'm going to redo all of City Lights with you, just the way I did the Gold Rush. I'm going to redo the whole thing with you.
But even Chaplin realized this was not the gold rush. Times had changed, and he had shot far too much film. Marion Davis knew he'd never wasted. A friend of both, she told Virginia, now you can name your own terms.
So I said to Charlie, I can't come back and work, because I no longer have a contract with you. And he said, what do you mean? What do you mean? I said, I signed it before I was of age. He said, that's nonsense, absolute nonsense. So I said, no, it isn't. I was 21 last week. And ask your lawyer if it's not so. And he hung up. He called back later and said, I think you'd better come down and we'll talk about it. So Marion said, now you've got him. And I went back and I got double the amount. So I had the large sum of $150 a week from then on to the rest of the film.
It was 3 years since the last Chaplin film. Silent films were now a curiosity. Yet at the opening, a crowd of 25,000 caused a near riot. Chaplin's future rested on this film, for which he'd even written the music. He was extremely nervous.
All the way down, he kept saying, I don't care if it's a failure or a success. And what is fame? Well, I don't care a bit about fame or being popular or accepted. And he kept raving on about convincing himself that he just didn't care about how the evening went. It wasn't going to affect him one way or the other. And then we get to the theater. And at the end of the picture, they all stand in acclamation, just applauding him until it reverberated with noise, whistling and everything. And then he admitted, like a little baby, I do love the public. I've got to have acclaim. I've got to be accepted by people. And he was himself. He admitted that he needed the applause of the world. He lived on it. He loved it.
Charlie has served his sentence, but all he has endured is about to be rewarded. Thanks to him, the girl's sight has been restored. She works in a flower shop, wondering when her benefactor will call and what he will look like. Douglas Fairbanks home movie of 1929. Chaplin plays a Grecian spirit, in a German helmet. Even when playing the fool, Chaplin could sometimes create an idea, which he would return to years later.
Out Caesar, out Nolus, Emperor of the world.
The Great Dictator, 1940. Chaplin was an all-round entertainer. Long before the talkies, he was writing music and recording it. Here he guest conducts the Abe Lyman Orchestra in 1923. We have combined his record with the film. Even when he relaxed at parties, his mind did not. This 1926 home movie has never been shown before. His most popular turn, the Dance of the Rose from the Gold Rush. Among the famous titles in the Chaplin vault are other films that never saw the light of day. Films that did not measure up to Chaplin's exacting standards. Films like The Professor, abandoned after one sequence. Films of First War propaganda, visitors to his studio, and How to Make Movies, made partly to celebrate his independence, but mainly for fun. Hollywood was rural when Chaplin bought 5 acres of lemon, orange, and peach trees. It was not rural for long. To calm local feeling, Chaplin built his studio in disguise. Chaplin's studio employees played themselves. His valet, Tom Harrington. In his film, Chaplin made fun of his role as boss. But visitors wanted only to meet the clown, the entertainer, and he made little films about them as well. Not only with actresses like Maxine Elliott, but with other notables like former Chief of Staff General Wood. The Bishop of Birmingham, also in uniform. Crown Prince Frederick of Denmark wants to see Charlie's Walk. They decide to make a film using a set for Sunnyside and co-starring Edna Purviance. Chaplin organizes the royal entourage. Boxing champion Benny Leonard on the set of A Dog's Life with his manager and Charlie's brother Sid. Out of these vignettes would emerge routines Chaplin used in his films. During World War I, the great music hall comedian Harry Lauder paid a visit to Chaplin. Together they made a film to raise funds for wounded British soldiers. Lauder was already a star when Chaplin was still learning his craft in the English music hall. A scene Chaplin did not use. Chaplin does Lauder, and Lauder does Chaplin. Chaplin discarded this sequence, but he never wasted anything, particularly gags. Ten years later, he returned to the gag for the circus, but added a little extra. Chaplin had a mind like an attic, said an associate. He might discard ideas, but he would never forget them. He staged this sequence for a mutual comedy he never finished. He planned to use the same footage in How to Make Movies, and never finished that either. The short-sighted golfer is Albert Austin. Three years later, he returned to the same theme and the same location for The Idle Class. This time, the golfer is John Rand. This scene from Sunnyside, 1919, was part of a complete sequence, with Albert Austin suffering in the course of comedy. The Russians show it was full of elaborate gags. Chaplin cut the sequence together, but left it out of the final film. In it, Charlie is a handyman in a small-town hotel, expected to be everything, even a barber. Chaplin hated barbershops, and in real life learned to do the job for himself. Here he plays a man who has clearly never done it before. What he learned from this scene, he would use years later in one of the best-known sequences of The Great Dictator. In 1952, in Limelight, Chaplin played an old music hall comedian on Hard Times.
Phyllis, Henry! Phyllis, Henry, stop that! What do you think you're doing? You ought to be ashamed of yourselves, fighting like that.
In a dream, he remembers his old act for the flea circus.
Hurry up! Hey, up! Up! Hurry up! Hurry up! Stop that now. Phyllis, Phyllis, come up from there.
It was not the first time he'd tried such a scene.
Remember, you're on a diet.
Around 1923, he began a film called The Professor, It would probably have been his last for First National. What kind of film did he have in mind? It may always be a mystery. This is the entire sequence as Chaplin cut it. The professor was also a music hall comic on hard times, forced to sleep in a doss house. It was one of Chaplin's many attempts to get away from the tramp character. 1918. Troops passed the Chaplin studio on their way to play in a war film. A few days earlier, Chaplin had begun his own war film, Shoulder Arms, destined to become the most popular film of the entire war period. These domestic scenes were cut. The exhibitors wanted a short comedy, not a feature. But this scene also fell victim. Charlie's Medical, with Albert Austin. It will be one of many sequences from the famous films which would never reach the public. The circus, begun in 1926, was the most miserable experience in Chaplin's career. His marriage had broken up. A divorce took over his life and the headlines, and he had to stop the picture in mid-production. He shot several sequences he never even cut together. This is one. In the film, Charlie's rival for the girl is the tightrope walker. Charlie determines to learn his skill. Making the film had its own problems. In this case, an unpredictable dog. Charlie is trying to impress the girl, Myrna Kennedy, but things go wrong from the moment they meet the rival, played by Harry Crocker. Chaplin abandons the dog. In the restaurant scene, a special effect. Doc Stone plays a tough prize fighter, as well as his twin brother. thanks to double exposure. We have assembled the rushes as we think Chaplin planned the scene. Charlie, caught in the machine age, was the theme of modern times. Made in 1936, yet still a silent film. This is the only scene surviving from the outtakes. Chaplin edited it, then cut it out before release. Chaplin's favorite of all his films was City Lights, even though it had been so difficult to make. Its keynote was simplicity. This is how he planned to open the picture. On his backlot, he created a bustling metropolis. The opening scene was to have been 7 minutes of sustained invention, built around the simplest of objects. These rare scenes nearly perished in the flames. Chaplin ordered most of them destroyed. How many other remarkable moments were lost forever, we shall never know.